the T95's little brother in the TS5. This is of course the tier 8 premium tank destroyer that you can get if you manage to get lucky in your keycards like we did the other day in our keycard opening video, that if you want to check out, I will leave a link at the end of this video and hopefully in the description, so you can go to that video if you want to check out how we managed to pick up this tank in real time. Other than that, let's get into the review of the tank, showcase what this tank can do, why it's good, and why you might want to pick it up within World of Tanks, and if it is a broken premium that Wargaming have released recently, or at least within the last year. So, what does the tank rely on? Well, it is of course the armour model. Much like the T95, it relies on having that super heavy frontal armour, which allows you to bounce rounds and then being able to punish people with the DPM that the tank gets. Of course, having this 400 alpha damage and the ability to pump out shots every 7 seconds roughly, yeah, it makes the tank very, very nice when you're coming up against heavy tanks that just don't know where to shoot you. And yeah, talking about knowing where to shoot this tank, it is of course that big lower plate in that blue section on the very bottom of the tank. That is where the weakest point is, and if you manage to hit it there, that is where you can pen it very reliably. Failing that, or you can't see that point, then you want to be aiming at that cupola on the top left of the tank. Yes, you don't want to be aiming at the mantler or the superstructure, or basically anywhere on the front of the tank, because it goes up to somewhere in the region of 280, even the way down to about 230 frontal armour angled, so you're very unlikely to pen it through that superstructure unless you're in something like a Jaegeru heat round, which of course the tank can do because it does play up to tier 10. Now, what else does the tank have to offer in terms of its silver potential? Well, you can earn 50% silver, you've got a nice bonus to your tank XP, of course, having 115%, and of course the standard free XP bonuses and stuff like that. As far as the tank's speed, that is where the tank becomes very, very let down. 26 kilometers an hour top speed is certainly no crawling pace, but it feels like it within the game when you're playing up against some of the more competitive tanks that do have the speed. It can be a little bit frustrating, and if you get circled in this thing, yeah, it becomes very, very tedious to be able to play. Now, other than talking about the statistics of the tank, let's actually jump into some gameplay, showcase what the concealment can actually do and the vision range and the ability to pump out that damage very quickly. So let's join you in the gameplay and play some live. Right then, so we are on Abbey, of course, probably not the best map for this tank, which means that, yeah, we're going to be in a bit of a pickle if we manage to come up against some of those dreaded tanks on the enemy teams, especially those autoloaders in the form of the T54E2, things like the Demolisher, that's a pretty decent one, and then of course our counterpart on the enemy team being the Bone Shaker, the skinned version of this tank, and if you've managed to pick up this one, then you'll be able to actually play it, because essentially they're the same tank. Unfortunately for you, if you do want the Bone Shaker variant that has that kind of Hot Wheels skin, you probably will never be able to get it now, because it really does, well, it's part of a time limited event and Wargaming don't have the license anymore to sell the tank. Of course, if you do own the tank, you can still play it, but you won't be able to consistently purchase it, or probably ever purchase it ever again. So that's a little bit disconcerting, or at least annoying if you've wanting that tank and if you're particularly invested in such a tank, but you can see that if you do manage to put this tank in a position where you can get forward and be the front line man, then it really can be a competitive one within the game. Now, am I saying that it's particularly broken? Well, I don't think that anyone's ever really going to say that this tank is super, super broken and it will be the game ender, the game ruiner, whatever you want to call it. It's not going to be that. It really isn't. But what it will do is be a competitive tank that can basically give you some very competitive games within World of Tanks. And you can see right here, when you manage to get into the position where you can deal damage consistently, that is where this tank comes in very clutch. And that's where you'll probably want to be picking this tank up for. Now we've got the T28 prototype essentially here in the Demolisher, which we can put heat rounds straight through the front of, because yeah, it's a pretty mediocre turret armor on that thing, and so we can just consistently put out rounds every like 6 seconds into that thing. So it's really not a problem for us, at least when we're playing in this tank. Of course, because we have that 300mm of penetration on this tank, which is more than enough to be able to go through, having a little bit of trouble with our teammates who keep bumping into us, which is unfortunate. You know, it's a bit of an annoying scenario for us fighting on a corner, but we will try and do the best of what we can do. Of course, we can still pump rounds into the Demolisher, and he's really not having a fun day because the turret armor on that thing is very, very lackluster, and you'll notice that if you've ever played in any of the T28 line, whether that be the stationary tank or whether you're playing in that T28 prototype with the turret, it really comes in a little bit tedious as a tank. Now, what can we do in these sort of matchups against some of these tanks? Well, you do have to be a very cautious player because, yes, you can lose a lot of hit points very, very quickly if you don't manage to keep the rounds hitting your opponents and keep your frontal armor towards the opponents, because that is where you're predominantly going to be able to bounce rounds. If you do not kind of aim properly, if you do not put your frontal armor towards the opponents, I mean, as with most tanks, you're going to find it very, very difficult to consistently deal damage to the ones that you're coming up against. Of course, if you are interested in picking up this tank, I would recommend it. I think it is a fairly decent one that you'll be able to play in. I don't think it's particularly super broken, but you can see that when enemy tanks decide that they're going to load the premium rounds, as you saw with us against the enemy version of ourselves, it can be pretty devastating. We lost a chunk of hit points very consistently against the opponents that we were playing up against. Now, in this game, what do we need to do? Well, of course, we need to pretty much help out this Ferdinand as he advances on the SU-130 PM if we possibly can, as we keep getting lag spikes, which is very annoying. But yeah, hopefully we can get a shot on the SU. We don't manage to, but the Ferdinand takes one big slab of hit points. We're now going to have to get into cover as the Lycan, or the tank destroyer, light tank that's coming up behind us, decides that he's going to move and try and get us. We put one round into him. He's now probably reloading. Can't guarantee it, but it's almost likely that he's going to be reloading. And of course, we still have that T54E2 on the enemy team to take out within this game. EOC even 90 is not a tank that you want to have come up behind you in a tank like this because of the slow moving speed that the tank features, and of course having that kind of slow traverse speed as well, coupled with the fact that the armor model, yes, it can work, but it's not particularly the most overpowered tank that you're going to be seeing, and we have to be very careful with the artillery being close by. We don't know where he is, and it could be difficult if we decide to push forward and the artillery is aiming somewhere over here, because of course we don't have that many hit points to kind of trade with the artillery, and he doesn't have to actually pen us in this tank to be able to take us out. So, artillery is most likely either in that bush straight ahead. I believe he may have just fired, but we don't know for sure. And the ELC will probably be wanting to come up from behind us to try and get one last shot or a couple of last shots into us. Not guaranteed, but it's most likely that that's what he's going to be aiming to do. Now, we got spotted, which means that the ELC is aiming over this way, and we're going to have a little bit of trouble if the artillery manages to land a shot on us, which he, of course, doesn't manage to. You see that the good view range of the tank enables us to actually outspot this ELC AMX, as he's, or not ELC AMX, the ELC even 90, the tier 8 version of the AMX. So you can see that actually when you put your mind to it and when you actually use the tank as it's supposed to be, you can have these really good games. And certainly what you need to do is make sure that you're putting yourself in between objects and making sure that you secure your backside, because sausage sandwiches, as we've talked about before, are not something you want to see. Now, moving on, I think it's really important that this artillery gets out of the game, and so we're going to try and proxy spot him, or at least, yeah, there we go. We spotted him. Now we have to pull back because we know that the ELC is going to be nearby, so he's going to be over to our left most likely. We have to be a little bit careful. Obviously, the artillery could just YOLO us. I don't know that he probably will do that, but it is a possibility. Now, what can we do from this position? Well, it's a little bit difficult for us to be able to consistently do anything because, of course, the ELC is an absolute pain in the backside because, of course, he's fast, he's got good concealment, and although we have fantastic view range and we have pretty good camo, All it takes is for 2 shots of his tank to reach the back of our tank or the side of our tank for us to be taken out. Side armor of the TS5 is, well, pretty appalling, to be honest with you. You ain't going to be bouncing very much within this one. And so, yeah, I think it's very, very difficult situation at the minute for us. Of course, we do have some support in the form of the Ferdinand and the AT-15, but all 3 of us being super slow tanks makes it very, very difficult. As we keep reiterating. Of course, 3,000 damage isn't bad. 2,000 blocked is also very nice, considering that's like the full hit points of our tank all in one. Now, it's time for us to help out with our teammate and the ELC even 90. We of course get very, very lucky and manage to set him on fire, which is, as I say, very lucky. You can't consistently think that that's going to happen, because it won't. And when you're in a tank like this, you have to make every single tank shell hit, especially against those lightly armoured tanks, because you don't get that many opportunities due to the speed and also the shell rotation. And of course, the shell velocity not being the best within this tank, so it can be a little bit difficult. If you load the premium rounds within this tank, yes, you can fire shells a little bit faster, and the heat rounds do definitely work a little bit decent, or they can work decently. But for the most part, you do want to be firing your AP rounds, because, you know, at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to save you a little bit of cash. And of course, that's what you want a premium tank for, at least I do anyway, is to earn that silver and progress your account. And so you can go down the tech tree lines and do all of that kind of fun stuff that is all associated with it. Of course, me and the Ferdinand and the AT-15 holding down that flank and managing to progress very nicely into the opponent's base, and therefore winning the game. We picked up 3,579 damage and 286 assistance. Fairly decent game. Certainly not the worst that we've ever seen. 1,700 base experience. That Ferdinand really had a fantastic game. But we'll move into the next one, showcase some more gameplay before we end up this video, and hopefully you can get a real gist of the tank. It's kind of always good to showcase what a tank can do before you buy it, because you want to see what it can actually do before you invest the crazy amounts of gold or time to be able to purchase this tank within the game. Okay, so we got Duke La Pass as our second gameplay of today. Of course, this could be an absolute terrible game. I have no idea. I am as clued in with as you are, because we are playing, of course, live within this gameplay, so God knows what's going to happen. Hopefully we have a fantastic game, but if it's terrible, it's probably funny for you guys to watch, to be honest. And yeah, we're going to showcase what sort of positions you want to be taking this tank within Duke La Pass, because it is a fairly new revamped map coming back into the game for a long time since it's actually been in, or at least when it was last in the game. Of course, now that it's come back, of course, many of you who may have joined the game within the last year probably have no idea where you should be going on this map, and I guess that I'll try and help you out if you're playing a tank destroyer, because, you know, that's kind of what this video is. We've got to play it, or at least if I want to have a good game, I've got to play it in the pretty good position at least. Now, often I would actually stay over to the right and just support the right hand side from where we spawn, or straight ahead over there at B1, or the number line as I like to call it. But unfortunately, because our team have all gone the kind of, well, K0 line, then you're going to basically have to be progressing with them, because if you go on your own against a flank, no matter how good of a player you are in World of Tanks, if you're not situational, you know, you probably aren't one of the best players anyway. But yeah, you do have to think about the situation that you're going to be in and move accordingly and progress to a certain point where you can have an impact for your team. And if you're not near your team, then you need to be getting assistance damage, which of course relies upon you having a team that's close by. Now, I'm making a kind of pretty bold play here. This is not something you want to be doing in a tank destroyer that's fairly slow, especially if the enemy team have light tanks that can progress, but unfortunately for the enemy team, they don't. And so we can make or take advantage of that and move and progress down this flank. Now, you saw that rock behind me. That's a pretty decent position to cover you from the right hand side of the map, and so if you are going to progress on this side, that's a great place to stop and just take in anyone that's maybe kind of camping over on this side of the map. Now, as far as progressing further, we do have to be really careful of the right hand side of the map, because most people who camp over the right hand side will be able to shoot you, especially if they're using the position in G4, which is a really decent position to be like a defensive one at least, and so yeah, you do have to be really careful with that, or mindful, and so that's what we're going to be doing. Now, Bellerophon, of course we do get hit from that position that I've literally just been talking about, and so yes, well done Ashley for being an absolute moron, not even taking your own advice, but yeah, you can probably guess where these shells are coming in from. Of course, artillery being the funnest class within the game, trying to take out some hit points off of us, and so I think we're going to actually just fully retreat after we take a pot shot at someone that's potentially over there. Don't know whether they will be, but we'll take a pot shot anyway. Now we can try and progress this flank, because our team seem to be getting caught up against some of these tanks that we should really just progress and take them out and focus fire on the enemies that are on the lowest hit points, because once they're out the game they can't hit you anymore, and even a tank on 1 HP can still do a full damage on you, so that is something you have to bear in mind when you're playing in mortar tanks. Sometimes it is actually worth taking the lower amount of damage, not always, don't get me wrong, sometimes it is worth going for the higher the higher enemy that has the more hit points, but not all of the time, and certainly there are times when you don't want to be doing that. Now, we've just been absolutely stumped by the Draugr once again. He's obviously getting hits on us from the left-hand side, which is really annoying. Not the end of the world, but we can just put rounds as and when we need to into the opponents in front of us. Have to be careful of these Chimeras, because they've got pretty annoying guns, especially if they're firing premium rounds. Equalizer thinks he's funny by going for us. Once again, another sort of tank that you really don't want to be getting hit by is artillery in this one, because the top of your tank is bloody awful, and you won't be bouncing anything really if they manage to land a shell right on top of you in the TS5, especially if you're coming up against tier 10 artillery, which of course, as a lot of you will probably already know, are some of the most toxic class within the game. Now, you see what we're doing here is taking a pretty steep move down over to the right hand side. The Object 257 over here thinks that he's funny, and so we're going to try and bait him into shooting. There we go, he's shot, which means that now we've got to be careful from the left hand side. We saw a tree fall down, which is not good, and so it's a little bit annoying because we know that we have to push, as well as having the fact that the artillery is behind us, and if he manages to pen us quite a few times, that can be really horrible. But also, if we do push up, we're exposing the lower plate of the tank, and this is where it becomes really awkward. It's either you don't do anything within the game, or you try and do something and then you end up getting stumped by the opponents who are progressing. And you can see that stupid Draugr manages to hit us again, really annoying. This is where it really does kind of showcase what the tank can be limited by within the matchups that you can play in. Now, moving forward, I really need to spot this Draugr because he's been an absolute nightmare for everyone involved. And you can see we can put one into him, which is nice, get us a little bit of hit points on him. Of course, we do have to be careful of the Equalizer, who our team don't seem to be spotting right now, which is really annoying because the quicker he's out of the game, the better, to be honest with you. Don't quite know what the best option here is. I've got to be careful of the 257 hitting our cupola, because that will be really tedious if that happens, but yeah, hopefully we can manage to get a shot on this guy. Not guaranteed. Draugr is now moving back, and we've got the 257 who's decided that he is now on the move. We also have the Chimera that's being a pain in the arse, so we need to get rid of him if possible. Of course, he's in a pretty awkward position for himself, and of course us. Yes, we have got the 257 behind us, but we angled there, meaning that he bounced, which means that yes, he's probably going to be taken out within this game, hopefully. He is, which means that that's a benefit to us, and now we haven't had such an awful game. We've picked up 2k damage. It was probably funny to see me messing about on this map and failing pretty hard, and of course you saw exactly where the limitations of the tank are, being that big lower plate and the lack of gun depression and the turret armour, making it very difficult on situations where you are trying to fight over a hill, and yeah, the mobility still being pretty mediocre. There we go, that is the TS5. Is it overpowered? No. Is it fantastic? No. Is it terrible? Absolutely not. This is a fairly tank destroyer player's tank. I know that sounds very intuitive, not very intuitive even. Of course, it is a tank destroyer, but it really does play like a DPM machine where it does rely on that super heavy armour that the tank does get and can bounce very reliably, but it also relies upon you positioning yourself very nicely on the map, and so that's where the trade-off really comes with this tank. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to check out how we managed to obtain the TS5 for free essentially, well, not for free, we paid for keycards, but we got them out of it, then you can watch our keycard opening video. And if you want to check out any guides or gameplay or just tips for World of Tanks console, then I'll leave a playlist for that in the right hand side of the screen right now. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you join me in one of those, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.